When it comes to the role and purpose of the state, two divergent interpretations emerge. The first interpretation, which the vast majority of people adhere to, is that the role of the state is to take care of its citizens. Politicians such as Presidents Franklin Delano Roosevelt and Lyndon Baines Johnson consistently asserted throughout their long political careers that the role of the state is to assist those who are unable to take care of themselves, to provide services that the market fails to provide. This interpretation of the state, held by most ordinary citizens, attributes to it an altruistic and benevolent role. This theory of the benevolent state was developed by Alexander Hamilton, the American founding father who unequivocally advocated the need for a strong, centralized state with a quasi-monarchical dimension, who himself drew his ideas from those of Thomas Hobbes, the British theorist and author of the famous book on the social contract entitled Leviathan. The second interpretation of the role and purpose of the state is a more pessimistic and realistic interpretation of the state, based on the fact that the role of the state must be limited because giving too much power to the state logically leads to tyranny. This interpretation limits the role of the state to protecting the rights of individuals, i.e., protecting the right to life, liberty, and property. Apart from these so-called sovereign functions, the state has no other obligation towards its citizens, as citizens are responsible for their choices and decisions, and for the results of those decisions. This interpretation of the role of the state was theorized by the political philosopher John Locke, author of the famous Second Treatise on Government, and implemented in the American Constitution by Thomas Jefferson, ideological enemy of Alexander Hamilton, and James Madison. The interpretation of the limited role of the state emphasizes individual liberty. In other words, the less the state is involved in human affairs, the freer is the citizen. The concept of limited government is one that has faded over time. With wars, economic and financial crises, and social inequalities spreading throughout society's evolution, many people have begun to adopt the stance of the benevolent state. Many have come to believe that the state is indispensable for national progress, and above all, that government action is based on altruism. However, two American economists in the late 1950s and early 1960s demonstrated that government action is not based on altruism or the so-called benevolence of the state, but on the self-interest of state agents, i.e., politicians, their elected representatives, and bureaucrats. These two economists were James M. Buchanan, winner of the Nobel Prize in Economics in 1986, and his colleague and friend Gordon Tullock. Together, they published one of the most influential books of the 20th century, which shaped the disciplines of political science and economics. The book is entitled The Calculus of Consent, and it brought the theory of public choice to light. In The Calculus of Consent, Buchanan and Tullock argue that politics should be analyzed as an exchange process among rational, self-interested individuals, not as a realm of altruistic public interest. Constitutional rules are treated as a contract that rational actors would agree to, behind a veil of uncertainty about their future positions in society. James Buchanan and Gordon Tullock deeply believed that government officials, politicians, bureaucrats, and regulators are not inherently benevolent or altruistic public servants acting solely for the common good, but rather rational individuals driven by self-interest, much like participants in a market. They believed that human nature did not change in government roles. They posited that people enter politics with the same motivations they have in private life, seeking personal gains such as power, prestige, income, or re-election. For instance, politicians might support policies that benefit their donors or secure votes rather than optimizing societal welfare. Bureaucrats, similarly, could expand their agencies' budgets or influence to enhance their own job security and authority, leading to inefficiencies or government failure, analogous to market failures. The book is based on the idea that collective action results from individual actions and choices. It rejects the concept of an organic state with an independent will, viewing the state as a human artifact. More importantly, the book also argues that vote trading is a natural and expected part of the political process, allowing for efficient allocation of resources and the potential for mutually beneficial outcomes, Pareto optimality, similar to market exchanges. Moreover, they contended that in democratic systems, voters, interest groups, and officials all pursue their own interests. Buchanan highlighted phenomena like log rolling, vote trading among legislators, and rent-seeking, using political influence for economic gain, which distort outcomes away from the public good. They saw government as a form of exchange where individuals consent to rules, like taxes for public goods, but without proper constraints, self-interest could lead to exploitation or overreach. To mitigate these issues, Buchanan advocated for institutional designs, such as fiscal rules or balanced budget requirements, to limit the scope for self-interested abuse of power. His work emphasized that assuming benevolence in government leads to naive policies, while recognizing self-interest promotes more realistic and robust systems. The calculus of consent uses economic theory to show that rational, self-interested individuals would choose constitutional rules, supermajorities, bicameralism, etc., that minimize the sum of decision-making costs and the expected costs of being outvoted, providing the first systematic rational choice defense of limited constitutional democracy. A more important question to ask is, what is public choice theory? Public choice theory, also known simply as public choice, is an interdisciplinary field that applies economic principles and tools to analyze political processes and decision-making. It emerged as a way to study traditional problems in political science through the lens of economics, focusing on the behavior of self-interested individuals such as voters, politicians, and bureaucrats. This approach treats political interactions as a form of market exchange, where actors maximize their utility under constraints, often modeled using game theory, decision theory, or utility maximization frameworks. The theory's roots can be traced back to the 19th century, with precursors like Swedish economist Knut Wicksell, who viewed government as a system of political exchange and proposed linking taxes to public expenditures via the benefit principle. Another early influence was American statesman John C. Calhoun, whose writings on political economy anticipated modern ideas about self-interest in governance. Public choice is considered a subset of positive political theory, describing what is, but can extend to normative analysis, suggesting what ought to be, for improving constitutional rules. It overlaps with social choice theory, which uses mathematical methods to aggregate individual preferences and is often classified under public economics. As a matter of fact, Duncan Black is often regarded as the founding father for his contributions to election theory, including the median voter theorem. Kenneth J. Arrow's 1951 book, Social Choice and Individual Values, demonstrated the impossibility of predictable outcomes in non-dictatorial voting systems, earning him a Nobel in 1972. Anthony Downs advanced the field with an economic theory of democracy, 1957, modeling politics as a competitive market. Mancur Olson's The Logic of Collective Action, 1965, explained why special interest groups form and succeed despite collective action problems. Were Buchanan and Tullock right to believe that government doesn't operate out of benevolence, but out of self-interest? They were certainly right in highlighting self-interest as a significant force in government, backed by empirical evidence of rent-seeking and inefficiencies. Their theory provides a realistic lens for understanding political failures and designing safeguards. Indeed, studies show that elected officials often prioritize personal gains, such as re-election or financial benefits, over public welfare. For example, empirical research on judicial decision-making indicates that judges may be influenced by self-interest factors like career advancement or ideological alignment, leading to government failure, similar to market failures. Regulation is frequently modeled as the result of self-interested interactions between economic and political actors, where industries lobby for favorable rules to capture rents. In the end, it is always important to remember that the government is run by individuals, and individuals are naturally self-interested. Thus, limitations and constraints need to be placed upon them to avoid the state descending into tyranny.